Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Wolt Tech Talks podcast. My name is Jerry Pussinen. I'm a staff engineer and Python competence lead at Wolt. And today I'll be interviewing Michael Fynes about splitting the monolith. Welcome, Michael. Would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm Michael Fynes, or Mike Fynes. I'm a team lead here at Wolt. I've been with Wolt for almost 3 years now, working in the payments and fintech domains. I've been working on growing and maturing these things at Wolt. So when I started, there was a very small team, and now we're a very big team.
Great, the usual story from small team to a big team, and maybe from a small project to a big project, which is a nice bridge to today's topic. So maybe let's start by describing what kind of monolith we are talking about. So could you shed some light on that?
Yeah, so at Wolt, we, like many other startups, have begun with a monolith. It was handling pretty much everything from consumer flows, orders, payments, various internal tools, etc. And although we talk about it as a legacy or a monolith that we are splitting out from, the reality is it's quite a nice service. It's modern Python, runs in 3.9. It has no custom Django stuff lurking underneath, and great test coverage. I think it's over 90%, linting, typing, etc. So it's slower to work with than smaller services, but it's not some sort of mysterious nightmare that no one knows how it works.
And maybe to give an idea for the audience about the size, so we're talking about hundreds of thousands of lines of code, not millions of lines of code. Could you maybe give some real-world examples of the things that we have split out, maybe from your past? I know that you have been working in different money-related domains and done more than one split during your time at Wolt. So, and maybe combine those with the motivation. Why did you begin with splitting at all?
Yeah. So when I joined Wolt, I joined the payments team. And at that time, pretty much all of our payments code was in the monolith. Everything related to how we handled payments sat there. What we found was adding new ways of paying with Wolt was quite difficult because the original setup of payments was very specific to the one payment provider. So we made a decision for the new payment providers to be in a new separate service entirely. This let us deliver these payment provider integrations much faster. Effectively, what the new service does is convert a Wolt payment request into a specific payment request to the integration. The way we did this then is, like I said, we started with just the new ones. Once we kind of got the service up and running and there were several new payment providers living there, we were able to start migrating the old ones as well. And this was where the payoff for the new service really took off, that we were able to add new payment providers and move the old ones quite smoothly with zero interruption to the way that the payment flows worked at Wolt, which is critical. In payments, availability is king. If people cannot pay, they cannot order anything. So without this flow working, we couldn't operate at all. Other than that, what that meant was we had to take a strategy for moving things without interrupting the business flows, without anything really changing from the customer's perspective. And we were able to do this by aggressively using sort of feature flags and throttling or splitting the traffic between the old service and the new service, depending on the certain characteristics. So, for example, once we were happy that the service was ready to take traffic and migrate things over, we started with employees first. So only employees were hitting the new service. Then we added maybe 10% or something like that to make sure the new service could handle the volumes. And eventually we moved everything over. And this was a really nice way of gently introducing the new service to the flow. And then this then cuts off the old setup, which can then be removed entirely, which is always a very nice feeling.
Well, what kind of time span are we talking here from the idea to actually removing the code from the old code base?
I think it took about a year. So this sounds like quite a long time, but in that year, it's not like we didn't do anything. It was there was a lot of new stuff happening in the new service, and then it was sort of decision was taken that okay, now it's time to move this old stuff over, because if we don't, then it's going to be more difficult to implement something else. Like usually, what happens is there's some new requirement comes up that implementing it twice just feels ridiculously painful. So you only want to do it once. It's better to move it over.
Great. And did you have some other concrete example from splitting the monolith?
Yeah. So the other big one we've been working on is moving some invoicing stuff out of the monolith. So we made a big bet a bit over a year ago that this is going to be something that we need to really take on at Wolt and take on in a way that we need to scale this up much more. So the old setup basically was hard to work with. It used what's it called, Ginger templates. It used some logic was in the templates. It was hard to test, hard to verify what was happening. And the team felt that they didn't really own the code. So there was a problem there that many teams were working on it. No one was really certain who owned the code, or the ownership was very diluted. And delivering new features related to invoicing was very difficult and took a lot of time. With the new setup, what we did was move the entire invoicing data flow downstream of the monolith using Kafka topics. So Kafka as an asynchronous queue. And we simply consume the data there in a almost entirely separate ecosystem from the old monolith. What this means is we are not dependent in any way really on the monolith anymore. And we can build and add features as we need, as quickly or as fast as we can. And the team owns the entire process then end to end. We did this. Now here we had a slightly different approach because availability for this was not so critical. What was critical, it was more on the consistency side, that the data had to flow. There was no questions that we could drop data in between. So what we set up was a shadow service. So there's many terms for this, but effectively we run the service in production with production data, but we don't take any action on it. We simply do all the calculations and creating the data, but we don't do any further steps. And this meant we could verify in production that the outcome we had matches what we expect. And when you can do that, because production data is always going to be, most often is going to be larger data sets than development or staging, and you will hit every single corner case over a certain, if you stay in shadow mode long enough, you will hit every corner case that you can think of that your users are doing. And that was really nice. That let us move bit by bit, sort of feature by feature, country by country, each setup over to this new service. And it's already paying off in many ways. So especially with things like development velocity, we've been able to deliver features in days that used to take months, in hours stuff that used to take weeks. And we are very happy with it.
Awesome. So two quite different approaches and different use cases. For me, it sounds like this latter one is kind of the happy case in the sense that there's some calculation and you can verify that the result, like from the existing code and the new code, and run them side by side. But for the first one, you mentioned that it was first rolled out for the employees, but how did you, I assume you needed to verify already before that somehow that the functionality hasn't changed between the old code and the new code?
Yeah. So the before we rolled out to employees, we would have it set up in the development environments, and we would have end-to-end testing set up for that. End-to-end testing is another thing I'm very keen on, especially when migrating things out. It gives you this great confidence that from the sort of customer perspective, nothing really changes between the flows A and B. It stays the same, and you can verify that it stays the same. Now, when it comes to payments, the reality is that no matter how wonderful your development environment is, you cannot mock real banks at all, because there are, even within Europe, tens of thousands of banks, and they all behave slightly differently. So there, the way we did it once we went to production was before even employees, actually. We started with just 1 or 2 users, and they were usually employees in the local country. This is really important, that you're testing the real use case of what you're trying to do, especially with payments. If, for example, I would set myself up as a customer, but the feature was only valid for Japan, for example, the behavior of how my payment works is actually quite different to what a local user with a local bank might encounter. And so that's what we want to try to avoid, do this kind of testing.
Great, thanks for sharing the insights. And I think we could move on to, like you have already shared some of the motivational bits why these splits have happened. And like you mentioned, from the user point of view, nothing changed. So I would assume that or that it could be hard to sell for, let's say, product managers or people working closely with, let's build new features which bring money and new customers and so on. How do you kind of motivate them that, okay, we need to take some months to move code from one place to the other? It's not going to bring any business value, but we still should do it. How's that?
Well, the reality is that you have to usually sell it in a way that they can see the benefit. So in the payments case, we were adding new payment methods to the Wolt platform, and we were able to do it faster than before. So this was an immediate win from product and business side. They can see that there are benefits here. On the invoicing side, it was hard to sell initially, but I think that pretty much all of the relevant stakeholders have now bought in, because they can see the benefits in the development velocity, that you can provide new features much, much faster with a smaller service. Caveat, usually. And this is a huge boon to teams, that they can push things out faster, they can experiment more, they can change things in a much easier way.
How about, like, from your perspective, has it been easy to sell to your peers, like other engineers, or?
I think initially, no. Initially, sometimes it's hard to convince people to say, to change. What sort of the argument is, if it works, why start fiddling with it? But I think that once they start seeing the benefits, and you can show that this is how much faster you can deliver the features you're being asked. It reduces pressures on the team as well, that they can deliver things they're being asked of much quicker, and they don't have to worry about other teams as much. There are many fewer cross-team dependencies. There are less code overlap between the teams, and they can just ship really, really quickly. And once they see that, then it becomes very, very easy to sell.
And I guess some of the wins from the first use case that you described might have been used while selling the second one.
Yeah, I wasn't involved initially in the pitch for the second case, but definitely when I joined the team, I brought in that idea that we need to push this forward and push it hard so we can reap the benefits. The danger is if you go too fast, then things might break. The danger is if you go too slow, then you have to maintain two code bases that do the same thing, which is also very painful.
So a balancing act, sounds like.
Definitely.
Great. How about any challenges on the way? Any learnings? Did you do something like completely differently between these two? I bet you learned something from the first one, and yeah.
Yeah. So the first time we did this, we didn't really think that much about how it affects things upstream from the service. So things like mobile clients and consumer clients. The reality is, especially with mobile clients, is that they have quite a long lead time for updates. So if you change something related to how an API behaves, you have to be backwards compatible. Otherwise, you're going to break stuff for your customers, which is not good. That was difficult at first, but we kind of incorporated that into the way we worked in the end. That they had to keep working for all the clients and also support the newer ones. In some cases, we did have to make kind of very difficult choices that said, okay, this new feature that comes from this new service can only be used by the new clients because the code simply doesn't exist in the old ones. But those are quite rare, and some we avoided. In this second case with the invoices, we don't have that problem. So the upstream actually was very easy to manage. And the main lesson learned was we did not want to have any kind of direct connection upstream if we could at all avoid it. Because that, if you can make that entirely asynchronous, entirely sort of abstracted between the services, what you get out of that is a freedom to basically do whatever you want. All you're consuming is data, and then you can do whatever you want with it afterwards, which is really, really powerful.
So dealing with mobile clients can be a pain when introducing new things. And so yeah, that's the case here as well.
With any clients, really. So web clients can be difficult, but usually you can update them much faster because you don't have that time.
Was there some versioning between the APIs, or did you really go for completely backwards compatible throughout the development?
We had some versioning, yeah. And we had some flags that control which features are available, where we check the versions of the clients to make sure that we were not trying to push things to the clients that they wouldn't be able to deal with. But yeah, versioning the APIs and stuff is good, but that also kind of introduces complexity in how you handle those and how you make them redundant eventually. We have found endpoints and APIs that we are still maintaining years later that were not being used by very many users. So in those cases, it's sometimes cheaper and easier for everyone to just cut them. And tell the customers in the nicest way possible that they should update the app.
That's a balancing act as well when to do the cutting. Yeah. You have mentioned many of the benefits that you have seen after finalizing this splits. Could you maybe summarize what have been the biggest wins and benefits from this?
Like I've said, the velocity of how fast we're able to ship new features is a huge win. And we've done integrations and new features that have taken in the past months to do. We've done them in a week, and it's happily running away in production. And other cases where we've looked ahead and seen, okay, we have this huge feature coming up. We work with finance and legal stuff, so sometimes we have no choice. It's a law has changed somewhere and we must be compliant. So then it's a case of we want to be able to react to those as quickly as we can. The risk of not hitting it would be quite dire. So in the new setup, a lot of the work we've done is to make it possible to do that kind of changes quickly.
How about the scalability and robustness aspects of the services? Like, have you seen any upsides on that front?
Yeah, definitely. On the scalability side, so not being part of the monolith means we can scale entirely independently, depending on what kind of data we're getting and what the requirements are. And also it means we can drop all the work related to these features from the monolith. So it saves on that service's scalability budget. What we've then done on the invoicing side, especially because we're consuming these topics and queues, we can scale based on the queues more than any kind of resource usages. So we can just make sure that the service is able to consume at a certain rate and move on from there.
And how about for the robustness side? Like, do you think you have saved yourself from downtimes because of the splits?
And actually, even if we have downtimes, because we have this queuing system, what we are able to do is self-heal the service. So even if we have an outage where we are not getting data, we can go and refetch the data. And for financial stuff, this is really important. We cannot drop any data because then something goes missing in the books, or we're missing an invoice. And someone is not going to be happy with that down the months and years as accounting and finance get a hold of the data. For this, we've set up this self-healing process for the services. What that means is that it's either using an outbox pattern, which means that we guarantee at least once delivery, or for the services that are not yet using this outbox pattern, we have this checksum verification. So we go back and verify that all the data we should have received has actually been received. And then we can recover if we find that this is not the case.
Oh, this checksum sounds interesting. Is it like on the other side, you calculate something for a day, for example, then ask from the other side, like, what's the checksum for the data for this same time period today?
It's doing that actually once an hour per country.
Okay.
So we're verifying constantly that the data we have received matches what was expected to be sent. And if something is not expected to be sent, we can simply resend all the data that's missing and process it again.
I see. So basically, if it doesn't match for an hour, then reprocess the full hour. Yeah.
And this has saved us many gray hairs where and I think this is a good tip for splitting services in general, that more than one service, be ready to figure out what do you do if something happens to the communication between the services, whether using HTTPS or queues or gRPC or whatever. There will be cases where it doesn't work, and then you have to decide: do you care or not?
Thanks. How about in let's say for more general level discussion, what would you say? What's the correct timing for split, and when maybe when not to split? What's your experience on this?
So I would say the timing is right if you start to see a slowdown in the time it takes for a feature to get to production. If it used to take a week and then suddenly it takes 2 weeks or even more later on, then that's time to start looking at what's going on in your processes or in the development environment that you're working in. You can also often see that, I would say, lines of code is maybe not a great metric, because it could be that you're generating code or whatever, so you have no real way of assessing that. But number of developers working on a code base is also usually a good way of having a metric on that. Once you get above maybe 20, 30 people, then that usually means that you have maybe 4, 5, 6 teams, usually working on different topics. And then it's time to start thinking, is it time to move one of those topics out to its own setup?
And I guess also, like, when you start seeing that the work done by a completely unrelated domain brings you down for reason X, or because of the bug they have introduced, which is completely unrelated to your code, that's maybe one point as well.
That's true. Hopefully you get there before that starts to happen. It does happen that you see something entirely different from what you are doing, and then suddenly your stuff is also not working anymore.
Great. Thanks, Mike, for this interesting discussion. Do you have any final tips for people or teams who might be building a monolith at the moment and might be considering that should we go more towards microservices or should we keep on going?
Yeah, I would say be bold. So don't be afraid to split. Have a plan for how you actually do it, rather than just starting to code and kind of creating this dreaded distributed monolith. But I would also say, don't be afraid to kill services. So one of the other things that's come up when we've been doing this is actually we split too much. And then we realized that we have 2 services that are almost the same. All they do is talk to each other. So then we've combined them in some cases. So don't feel that once something is split, it has to stay split forever. It can be merged and combined with other services later on. We even have a service that originally was split, then it was merged, and now it's looking like we might split it again. Because now there is a actual use case for it being split. So don't be afraid to do it. Just do it.
And I guess this example where you had split something, then merged, and now you're splitting again, I guess that's also calling for proper architecture from the beginning so that it's splittable from the get-go.
Yeah. So the structure of the service needs to be such that you can just slice off chunks of it if you need to.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I guess we'll call it a day, and happy coding with monoliths and maybe microservices for the audience, and see you next time.